It's Kyle here, and with the start of the new year, I always like to look back at my favorite books that I read in the previous year. So this year I'm doing 3 videos. I'm highlighting my 5 favorite books in nonfiction, fiction, and Star Wars. This video will highlight my 5 favorite fiction books that I read in 2021. I should say these were books specifically I read in 2021, not necessarily that were published in 2021. When you're watching this video, I'm not sure what order I'm publishing these in, so the other videos might already be out on the channel. If they're not yet, just be patient. They'll be published within a few days after this video going live. But if you enjoyed this video, I really encourage you to check out those other 2 videos as well. And that being said, I'll dive right into my list. So my 5th favorite fiction book that I read in 2021 was Devolution by Max Brooks. Max Brooks is probably best known for his book World War Z or The Zombie Survival Guide, which are basically similar genre as De-Evolution, which are basically fiction books that are written in a non-fiction style, which I find really entertaining because I love reading non-fiction. But he's a very talented author, and he does an excellent job of making a fiction story feel like it's actually based on a historical event, so really appeals to me. De-Evolution is kind of based on the idea that Yetis slash Bigfoot slash Sasquatch, whatever you want to call those creatures, are actually alive, although humanity is, it's much like our society where people believe in it, but most people don't really believe it's a real thing. And the setting of this book, and this is in the Pacific Northwest, and there's a huge volcanic eruption that kind of cuts off this isolated settlement of a few families, and they're cut off kind of from civilization for a few months. They don't really know how long they're going to be cut off. And this book actually focuses on trying to figure out what happened, because basically this community's found, and it's clear something devastating has happened to it. Lots of dead bodies, stuff like that. But this journal was actually found by one of the members of the community, and this book actually explores what's in this community, this journal, which basically is the individual detailing this community's experiences with being attacked basically by Bigfoots, big feet, however, whatever the plural is of that. So it's very interesting. The author is kind of portrayed as like an investigator reporter who's trying to determine, is this true? Is this like a forged document that's trying to fool people? Almost like doctored footage of a UFO sighting or something like that. It's not sure. Is this really a true eyewitness account of a Bigfoot attack? So it's very interesting. The characters and how they react to this kind of element of nature they previously all believed was not real, and suddenly they're forced with evidence like, oh, this is real. How are we going to survive this? It's very fascinating. It's a very interesting look at how different people respond differently to traumatic events. Max Brooks is an amazing author. I've loved his books. I really love this book. This is actually my least favorite of his books. So it shows you how much I enjoy him, that my least favorite of his books still made my top 5 for this year. So De-Evolution by Max Brooks, great book. Number 4 is a sequel, Ready Player 2 by Ernest, Cline. When I heard there was going to be a sequel to Ready Player 1, which is one of my favorite books, I love Ready Player 1, I was a little skeptical because it was one of those books when I read it, it felt like it was a well encapsulated storyline. There's no need for a follow-up. And although I did enjoy Ready Player 2, I still don't think this book was necessarily needed. I did not enjoy it as much as Ready Player 1. I felt, especially the first half of the book, I was really not into it. I was like, I just don't like where this is going on. The second half of this book really saves the storyline. Ernest Cline does a really cool job of kind of shaping a concept and kind of exploring it to kind of make it feel like, oh, this is why this storyline, this sequel was necessary, and kind of giving the overall storyline a satisfactory conclusion. Overall, still don't necessarily know if this book was necessary, but it does become an enjoyable read. So if you like Ready Player One, I would recommend you check out Ready Player Two. I don't want to get into plot a whole lot of this one because it is a sequel, so I don't want to spoil anything, especially for people that haven't read Ready Player One yet. If you haven't read Ready Player One yet, read it. It's an amazing book. But Ready Player Two was my fourth favorite book that I read in 2021. Third favorite is a much older book, Contact by Carl Sagan. Like a lot of people my age, I was introduced to Contact as the movie that came out in the 90s starring Jodie Foster and Matthew McConaughey. Honestly, when I saw that movie, which I enjoyed it, I had no idea it was based on a book. I think I went several years after that, not being aware it was based on a book. Then eventually I became aware, like, oh, it's actually based on a book. And I was aware of Carl Sagan. Obviously, he's a very influential figure in scientific communication and education. And so I was kind of like, oh, at some point I want to read this. And I had a chance to pick this up like at a used book sale. So I thought, oh, let me check it out. Love this book. And actually, I will say this book, I think, was a lot better than the movie. And honestly, after reading the book, I can understand why they had problems with making the movie, because a lot of the concepts of this book don't necessarily translate very well to the screen. It's more, easily explored via the written word. There were some elements of the movie I think I did enjoy a little bit better. And I think there were some elements in the movie that kind of simplified some of the plot that I think maybe got a little overcomplicated in the book. So there was elements in the movie I did enjoy better than the book, but overall, I still enjoyed the book better. If you're not familiar with Contact, it's basically several scientists on Earth become aware of a radio communication coming from another planet/star. And basically, as more is investigated, it becomes clear this is an intelligent signal, and this is proof that life exists outside of Earth, and then what we should do about this. Because it's clear the signal is sending us instructions. And it's basically all humanity, from regular individuals, religious leaders, military leaders, political leaders, all trying to decide, what should we do? Very interesting book. Really enjoy it. If you like sci-fi and you've never read Contact by Carl Sagan, I definitely recommend it because it's quickly become one of my favorite sci-fi books for sure. Number two is another similar like Contact. It is a movie I'd seen, but I'd never read the book version. Now, in this case, The Hunt for Red October by Tom Clancy. I knew when I saw this movie that this was based on a book. I'd heard of Tom Clancy before this movie was promoted as being based on a Tom Clancy book, so I was aware of it. I just never read the book. I'm not sure why it took me so long, because The Hunt for Red October is one of my favorite movies of all time. It's definitely top 10 for me, maybe top 5. I just never got around it, and I kept an eye out for like a used copy somewhere, and for some reason I just never stumbled across a used copy at like Friends of the Library book sales and stuff like that. So eventually, last year, my mom and sister always make me do a list for like Christmas and birthday. So I actually put this book on that list. Got it as a gift. Finally read it. Really, really loved it. Now I'll say, I actually preferred the movie, and I figured I would just because I've grown up loving that movie. I've seen that movie so many times. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. I figured I'd have a hard time enjoying this book more than I did the movie. I actually think the movie did a little bit better job of developing some of the secondary characters and making some of the situations feel a little bit more tense. But overall, still really love this book. If you're not familiar with the concept of The Hunt for Red October, basically the Soviet Union has designed basically a stealth submarine. And this is set in the 1980s. And so this high of the Cold War, and when this submarine, the Red October, goes to sea, the captain announces his intentions to defect. And so now it's a race between the Soviet Union and U.S. to Soviet Union trying to stop the sub from defecting, the U.S. trying to get this sub without the Soviet Union knowing they got the sub, the crew trying to make it to safety in the U.S. before they're sunk by the Soviet Union. So much intrigue, so much tense situations. Really love it. If you've seen the movie and you've never read the book, I would definitely highly recommend it. If you've never seen the movie, see the movie, it's amazing. Sean Connery and Alec Baldwin are amazing. Sean Connery is absolutely, love him in this movie. Sam Neill's in it, it's really good. A lot of great actors in it. Amazing movie. But this is a really cool book. Definitely recommend it. And my favorite fiction book that I read in 2021 is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. If you've never heard of Project Hail Mary, probably a good reason is it came out fairly late in the year, so it's a pretty new book. I think most people, if Andy Weir, if that name sounds familiar, but you can't really place it, he is very famous for being the author of The Martian, which is probably one of the most best-selling books in the last decade. Obviously resulted in a huge movie starring Matt Damon, which was an amazing book. And ever since The Martian came out, I've got all of Andy Weir's books. I've really enjoyed them. This is probably my second favorite book. It is right after The Martian. Project Hail Mary is very fascinating. Like a lot of his books, Andy Weir does a great job of writing sci-fi, but including as much actual science as possible to make the book feel more grounded and feel like it's more possible. A lot of times when you read sci-fi, you're like, there's no way this could actually happen in our world, or it's going to be so far in the future, it doesn't really relate to me, the actual settings of it and stuff like that. Where Andy Weir's books, a lot of times you feel like, this is stuff that maybe could happen actually in my life, maybe it's not too far-fetched. The concept behind Project Hail Mary is scientists start noticing that the sun is starting to produce less energy for some reason. They can't figure out why, which is resulting in temperatures dropping dramatically on Earth. And they basically figured out, like, if something's not done, life on Earth will go extinct within 20 or 30 years. It'll become impossible to live on Earth. So Project Hail Mary has started to try to figure out what's going on with the sun and reverse it. I don't want to get too much of it because I want to spoil it, but it's somewhat similar in The Martian in that you have an individual who's very isolated and he's kind of had to deal with that as he's being faced in these like life-threatening situations in space. So it's similar to Martian in that regard. Like a lot of Andy Weir's books, there's a lot of humor in it. The character deals with a lot of stressful situations with humor, so it makes it, kind of very entertaining books. This is a very tense read in a lot of cases, but the humor kind of helps lessen that edge a little bit. Really enjoyed this book. I read it really quickly. It's one of those books when I read it, like, oh, I want to read this nonstop until I find out what happens, to kind of see what how Andy Weir wraps up this storyline. So the other thing I'll say I really enjoy about Andy Weir's books so far, they're all standalone. So you go in knowing, like, oh, I read this, I'm going to get a conclusion to this story. It's not like, oh, I have to read this and then there's 10 more books coming in the next 20 years before I know what really happens. This one, you read it and you know. So if you read The Martian, you saw the movie, enjoyed The Martian, check out Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. It is an amazingly written sci-fi book that I think you'll really enjoy. And it was my favorite fiction book that I read in 2021. In the comment section below, let me know, what was the favorite fiction book that you read in 2021. I'm very interested to see what other people's favorites were. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. I really appreciate it. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate the support. Again, hope you enjoyed this video. See you the next time, and happy reading.